No, I can't.
Okay.
It's been so long since I've given it any thought at all, I can't.
Okay, well, let's just take one aspect of that, which is back B was don't bow in public. Um, A was stay off the air. C was admit no crimes. And K was never kiss the enemy goodbye. But the most perhaps important part of it was U.S. and it had sort of a double meaning of the United States, obviously, but its real meaning was something else. Can you talk about what that meant and what it meant to you?
I think I know what you're referring to. And
It's unity over self.
as what?
Unity over self.
Yes, yeah. We were American fighting men in bad circumstances, but that we would predicate our actions, our responses to the enemy, not as individuals, but as part of the group. So our unity, our adherence to each other and to our ideals, to our entire existence was based on being American servicemen rather than being individuals in a bad circumstance. That was pretty important then, and it should be now and forever. If you're an American, you're an American. You're an American first. Because without that, you have nothing. You might get lucky once in a while, but it's not going to last forever. That's the way I saw it.
All right, I'm going to do a quick adjustment on the mic above you. Ev Alvarez said to me that the Vietnamese never really understood the American warrior. And part of what I gleaned from that was when I thought about a communist system, a huge part of why the Vietnamese tortured you and the sort of the central part of your battle behind bars was they wanted to use you as instruments of propaganda. Now,
Primarily, that's what we're all about, yeah.
Yeah. Now, in a certain way, as Americans, if we captured enemy soldiers, the idea of getting them to go make statements about how great America was wouldn't even occur to us. It's not part of our system.
No.
In a communist system, indoctrination by the Politburo, the Central Committee of those who are less than, and to go with the party line is really important. So they're being forced to an idea that we adapt freely. And that's a huge difference between the two cultures.
Yes.
So for them, this was a huge part to get you to come to their point of view. What was it about being American that they never understood and that helped you resist? Because there was something peculiar of you as American warriors, as American soldiers, as American officers, that you not only adhered to in terms of your unity as warriors, but also in terms of your country's flag.
I'm not quite sure where you're going.
Okay. In other words, freedom. Freedom to, Ev was threatened with pain and torture and told you could go home if you do this thing. But what they never understood was if he did that, that's not true freedom. He's being forced to something.
Right.
Okay? So I'm kind of looking in the place where in that statement they never understood the American soldier. Was there something in the way that you saw the resistance in the Hanoi prison systems that you think was uniquely American? Or uniquely to a democratic country?
I don't know. It's just not ringing a bell at the moment.
No problem whatsoever. One of the things that when the Alcatraz 11 were taken away from you, and I'm sure you weren't aware of what they were going through because it was
All right.
pretty tough. But at one point, there was what was referred to as the Stockdale Purge. They severely tortured different members of the Alcatraz 11 to identify who was the leader. And their idea in the Alcatraz 11 was if they could identify and isolate the Central Committee, all resistance would break
Right.
down.
Yes.
That's a communist notion. In effect, in a communist country, this Central Committee runs everything. And if you can take it away,
Mm-hmm.
what they didn't understand, Stockdale kept saying there's not a Central Committee. There's
Right.
not a Central Committee. You must write the Central Committee. So finally he said, okay, I'll write it. And they got him pencil and paper, and he wrote out 234 names. Two things happened in that moment. They were shocked that this man they had kept in complete isolation had committed to memory and was aware of every other POW
Mhm.
in the camps. But the other side of that is he was saying to them, you lop off the head of leadership and it will continue down the line.
Yes.
This is the part of leadership that I want to get at. And I see it in you, sir. Like there was immediately that response of what is my job to do in the absence of leadership, and then once leadership takes over, how do I do my job in the presence of leadership? Can you speak to me about that?
Well, it's a chain of command. We were just inculcated with that whole idea from our first experience in the military. The machine won't work without every part working. And as you say, if the leadership is removed, well, just not the leadership hasn't been removed, just that leader has been removed. And so we just took it as a basic truth that if the guy above you is removed, you're now the leader. And if you're going to get removed and then you're going to go someplace else and be with some other people probably, and one of them is going to be the senior guy, and you'll fall in line in the pecking order. And it's not of your choosing, it's just the way it is. We all knew what our rank was and what our data rank was. And that caused a little problem sometimes because you had people that were shot down 5 or 6 years after Alvarez who were obviously senior to him, but by rank, but by data rank, no, he had been a Lieutenant JG before they were even in the military. It was just such a basic part of us. And that part was relatively easy to understand and live with. It was the code of conduct that was a little difficult because recognizing something we felt was ironclad and that we had to adhere to it, and yet it wasn't, and it was only as we came to understand through some of our leadership, which was very helpful in understanding, well, it's a code. Remember, it's a code. It is a way of conducting yourself that is expected to the extent that you can do it, but if you can't do it, if they say fly up to that top of that building, you can't do that. You might be able to try, or you can climb the steps to get up there. There's a different way of doing it. But there's some things that you just can't do, and the code recognizes that. It does not hold you to it. And there were a few of our people who said, no, that's the code, it's ironclad, and if you can't adhere to it, you're a traitor. That was pretty narrow-minded, not very realistic, but some people did go with that.
It has been said of the experiences behind bars in the Hanoi prison systems that they were a crucible not only of good leadership, but also good followership. That the JGs, part of that military understanding that the next guy steps up is also, as leadership comes down, you have to internalize that because it's possible tomorrow you could be called on to be that leader who must now give guidance. So talk to me about something about being you were, I assume, a junior grade, were you in?
I was a lieutenant when I was shot
You were
down.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, talk to me about effective followership. In other words, the way that you take orders from the top, not only to follow them, but to internalize them to potentially one day lead them.
Yeah, you may be over my depth here.
If it doesn't make any sense, we could just move on to the next question. That's not a problem.
I'm just trying to think of a way to express. Leadership's a very. It's not cut and dried. It's not black and white. It's a little bit of everything, and the good leader evaluates that and makes the most of it. And there are authoritative leaders, and there are what we call natural leaders. And can we tell a difference? Well, there's a mix of each within, but I think the leaders who are respected the most are those who understand the situation at every level in which they're involved, so they can speak to their juniors in a way and in terms that the juniors will understand without feeling oppressed, feeling dictated to. Occasionally that's necessary, but I mean the very best commanding officer I ever had ultimately became a very, very good friend of mine. He's the best commanding officer that any of the guys in the squadron that I was in had ever had before or since then. And why? Well, you know, he didn't beat you over the head with a hammer to make you do something or to even suggest that you do something. But he was just a really nice guy, and he wasn't soft. He knew what had to be done, and he would insist that it be done and be done the right way. But he was able to do it in a manner that the juniors could accept and understand it was coming from his position as a leader, even though it might not have originated there. It might have come down from on high, but he could act as an intermediary there and get it down to the people who are going to get it done and make it understood in a way that they would understand it. To me, that's good leadership, and I always tried to model my leadership style after his. We were different, though, and I came up through the ranks. I was enlisted for 7 years before I was commissioned. Yeah.
Thank you.
So as far as I was concerned, and have been concerned ever since, I had a special plus factor in my corner. I could talk to the enlisted people for whom I might be responsible in a way that a lot of the other officers couldn't, because I got the respect from having been enlisted. You know, some guy right out of boat school or whatever didn't get that respect automatically. And although I might not have earned it in every situation, it didn't take long for them to feel me out. And a junior is always feeling out the senior. Whether, I mean, not necessarily in a bad way, but you got to know what's expected of you. As I later came to realize when I went back to college as a commander, and I got these young socialist professors teaching me all these required subjects, and I had to find out what the professor wanted and give it to them. It wasn't a matter of saying it the way it was or anything else. Find out what they want and parrot it back to them, and then I'd get my grade, and that would be it. From my position, going through college as a commander, it was just so different that that's the way I attacked it, and that worked for me. It just seemed to make sense. But you can see with a kid, like I've got, let's see, who is it we have? We got a grandchild. Our youngest grandchild has just started school. She's in her freshman year at Christopher Newport University. And he's a very smart kid and very serious and whatever. And you just tell her right up front, don't get too serious about this. Yes, we know you're a serious student and you want to learn, but first and foremost, find out what the professor wants. Find out what they want and how they expect to get it, and then work from there, but use that as a foundation.
Wonderful, wonderful. And on that subject of enlisted and understanding enlisted, I'm sure, familiar with Doug Hegdal.
Oh, yes, yeah.
I always think that Doug Hegdal had a kind of unique position.
Absolutely.
In there. And my understanding is he's one of the few people who gets a standing ovation when you all get together. And why is that? Tell me about Doug and what you particularly who came up through the ranks and enlisted.
Well, Doug was, I never lived with him. I've met him a couple of times at reunions. But such a unique situation, He was the most unlikely POW that there could possibly be, sleeping on the deck of the Canberra and then boom, boom, and he's, what, I'm in the water, what's going on? And then picked up as a spy by the Vietnamese. They didn't know what to make of him either. They thought, surely nobody can be this stupid. Well, Doug wasn't stupid, but he very quickly adapted to a totally unexpected circumstance and made it work for him. He acted stupid, and they very quickly came to assume, well, I don't know how he got here, but this is unreal. So we'll just put him out there with a broom, let him sweep around the camp and whatever, and we don't have to worry about him. Well, they did, because, of course, as you well know, when they decided they were going to release somebody to get some good propaganda back in the States and around the world, that's what they were interested in. They're going to release Doug Hegdal, because what harm can he do? Well, Doug Hegdal, as you know, memorized every name of every POW, and I think a few others that were missing, but we didn't know if they were POWs or not, but we had some information that had leaked down through the system somehow. And he took them all out. And he did a superlative job at that. He just handled himself perfectly for somebody as unlikely as he was to be in such a position. He just handled it beautifully, and it later went on in survival school and the like to carry that message down to those who would follow him. He is to be highly lauded for his performance as a POW.
And perhaps this is something with you coming up through the ranks of enlisted, where, and perhaps those who are just trained from the get-go as officers, perhaps don't see sometimes, is the power of leadership going on at the enlisted ranks. And what would you say to future leaders at the Naval Academy or others about valuing those subordinates under your command and seeing the best in them?
Complex situation, or complex situation, because you're dealing with individuals both in the officer corps and the enlisted ranks. They've come from different sources under different circumstances, and my advice to a budding officer, if you're going to grow up and learn your craft and do it well, you're going to have to make the most of your connections and experience with your troops. Without them, you can't do anything. I'm reacting because I'm still in contact with some of the troops from my squadron. And I'm so honored that they think enough of me to stay in touch. These were the guys that worked on my airplane. They're the guys who loaded the bombs on my airplane. They're the guys who gave it a final inspection before I launched on my final trip. They're the plane captain or crew chief of my airplane that I got shot down in the second time, the last time. So a leader has to come to realize that these people, as much as the equipment that they represent and the equipment that you as an officer are responsible for, these people are what make it all work. Without them, you can't do it. It just won't work. A squadron full of officers would be a real mess. Which isn't to say that all the enlisted troops are wonderful either. Having been one, I saw all kinds, but you see that at any level, in any society, any tribe, anything. You know, you've got good, bad, and indifferent. But it's very rewarding to me to, at this stage in life, 80 years old, 26 when I was shot down, to still be in touch with these guys because they care. I think that's the story of what goes around comes around. And I'm proud of it in my case.
Charlie tells a story of, you know, he's a public speaker.
Yeah, and he's a very good one. Yeah.
And he was one time, and there's tissues down there, sir, too, if you need.
Okay. Yeah.
One time he was speaking, I think, in Missouri or something, and he goes into a cafe and he's walking by a table, and a man at the table looks up and says, "You're Captain Charlie Plum, are you not, sir?" And Charlie stops and says, "Yeah, I am. How do you know me?" And he said, "Well, I was on the Kitty Hawk, and I packed your parachute."
Yeah.
And Charlie always talks about how he suddenly realized, you know, like, this is the guy.
Yeah.
Had he not done his job,
Exactly.
Charlie would not be alive today.
Yep.
And you appreciate exactly what you're saying.
Yeah, I had a similar circumstance, and when I got out and came back to my first squadron, after I got back, shortly after I got there, had a chief petty officer check in, and he'd been a second-class petty officer when I was shot down, and he was the guy who rigged my seat.
Wow. Wow.
So I said, "You're responsible for these shoulders." He said, "No, you were. I didn't pack it to go that fast."
On this subject.
Yeah, let me blow my nose here.
Yes, sir.
I am a wuss when it comes to emotional things. Anything where caring is involved. Operation Homecoming was a big deal to me because it showed people cared. And interpersonal relationships where it involves caring, that gets to me. All right.
So, on that subject, many of the former POWs I've spoken to, they, you know, they, 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 Well, as Ev said, we had a philosophy that you didn't ever let your fellows down. If they couldn't take care of themselves, you took care of them because you knew darn well they would do the same.
Mm-hmm.
There is this tremendous, tangible spirit of brotherhood between you and your fellow POWs. You went through something together that few of us can truly understand, but perhaps we can learn from. Speak to me about that brotherhood. About, it's interesting, I asked Ev about love. And he said, he grew up in a macho society. His father never once said, I love you. Wouldn't even think of it. Even when he wrote him in prison, he signed his thing, your father, E. Alvarez. But Ev learned in the Hanoi prison systems he runs into one of you guys today and has dinner. I love you.
Yeah.
And he says, I love you to my kids. And they say, I love you to him. He learned that in this prison system. How does that happen? Talk to me about that.
I don't know. I think it probably has to do, well, it's just probably the ultimate extension of the same kind of people doing the same kind of things. When you're going to school, you're taking the same sort of courses. You have a kinship with those of your fellow students. You have a kinship in a family because you're together all the time and you're the same blood. If you work in a factory, or in a milling machine alongside another individual who's running the same sort of machine, obviously you have a lot in common. I think that's the basis for all of this. Then you take it to that ultimate extension. Combat, we're talking life and death. Everybody knows it. When you're a young fighter pilot or attack pilot, as I was, it's not going to happen to me, but, we know that this is a life and death situation. And when it does happen to me, then I'll take it and I'll work it from there. But right now, I'm not going to think about that. So I think that's what it comes down to. There's nothing that's more binding than being in combat together, and more than those of us. I was just one guy in a cockpit. The F-4s and A-6s had two, but I had this bond with the other guys in the other airplanes, other squadrons. But it's even more than that. It's two guys in a foxhole together with incoming. Somebody with a flamethrower coming along going to toast you or whatever. That's got to be the ultimate. I didn't experience that. The POW experience was perhaps an offshoot, another branch, perhaps approaching that ultimate kinship. But I think that's where it comes from. And you do whatever is necessary to care for your buddy. That's what it's all about. We weren't fighting for Jack Armstrong in the American way. You're fighting for your buddy. Probably the first example that comes to mind in my case, we had an Air Force EWO who ended up in the Cuban program briefly with us. And he was subjected to such torture that he lost it permanently, became crazy. That's in my non-professional opinion. But those of us who had to care for him came to that conclusion, and that's what we did. We cared for them. We didn't have contact to him initially until the interrogator, Fidel, the guy we called Fidel, had done anything he wanted to do to him. But we finally got him released to us. There were 10 of us in a big cell there under the Cuban program. And we were to take this guy and make him whole again. And for a day or two, we thought maybe that was possible. But then it became obvious it wasn't possible because he got to looking at us, and his initial evaluation of us that we were pieces of Americans who had been shot down, killed, but they robbed parts from these people and put them together to make somebody who looked like an American, sounded like an American, but he had a communist brain and way of thinking in him. Now, I know that at that time it didn't seem to make much sense, and it doesn't now, but looking at guys like Norland Daughtry, he had rope burns across his elbows that were horrific, where he'd been tortured. His arms had been broken in high-speed ejection from an F-105. Others of us in the program had various things that made us look or act a little strange, according to his evaluation. So within a couple of days, he determined that we were the enemy. And so he shut right down. And he stopped eating. He was not going to cooperate with them. He was not going to cooperate with us. He was not going to eat. He was going to die. We determined he was not going to die. We were going to keep him alive. And we did our best. We did our best. And kept him with us as long as we possibly could. And finally, the Vietnamese determined he was of no value to them. And we weren't getting anywhere with him, I think. So they took him away. And later, they told us he had died in a hospital, which is laughable. I'm certain it wasn't a hospital. But we tried, because that is the warrior ethos. He was one of us. Even though we lost him to the ravages of torture, he was one of us, and we would save him if we could. Now, we didn't have too many tools to work with, but did what we could.
I think, I know this is a very painful subject for you, and I'm honestly not really looking for a voyeuristic question here, but I think in terms of the weave of edits, could you tell me what the Cuban program was and what it involved?
Well, I don't know, but in a nutshell, my evaluation, and I think those of the rest of us who were in it, was probably twofold. Was one, to work with combat Americans to see what they could do with us, what they could make us do, or how well they could get us to cooperate or whatever. It was an experimental program in that regard. Well, I think the long-range plan was to identify and prepare at least a couple of us for an early release and have us go home and, as all the communists wanted, go back and tell them what a wonderful system they had over there and how terribly we were treating the Vietnamese people and communists in general around the world. I think that's what it was all about. Didn't work out, and it would have been difficult if it had. Now, at the same time, there were some people being released who weren't part of that program. And I don't know any of them personally and can't really comment on it. I don't think their release got them a whole lot of good publicity back in the States at the time.
And this question is a difficult one too. But I think I'm trying to get at, again, future leaders will be listening to your voice, watching these edits and trying to understand themselves in the future and perhaps put themselves in similar circumstances or other circumstances as you and ask themselves the question, how would I do? What would I do? And I think we all ask that in a way when we hear your story. Can you speak to me? There were aspects of your resistance that were mounted by leadership and your fellow POWs, but there were aspects of your resistance you came to all on your own. You decided that for whatever reason, this is who I am and I won't cross this line. And it cost you dearly. You were really hurt because of that. What made you resist? I mean, I don't think it was one thing, but in when you were alone, when you decided, I'm going to go another mile, why?
Well, in my case, primarily because of my family, my wife and family. I knew that they would be expecting me to hang in there, do my job, come home when it was over, and get on with life. I think I was correct in assuming that, but that kept me going a good deal of the time. I mean, Carolyn and I were high school sweethearts, so we go back a long way. We had 4 children at the time I was shot down. So I had a lot to live for and a lot to attempt to retain my pride for. Going home is one thing, but going home with honor is something else. It's really a big deal. Return with honor is not just a catchphrase. It's a concept, it's a reality. You might not be able to express what honor is or what your version of honor is, but you feel it. And to go home without it was just unacceptable. It was to me, it was, I think, to most of us. So it's a phrase, it's a concept that must be understood, must be adhered to, just as being an American is that important too. If you're not an American, then what the hell are you doing here? And if you can't return with honor, why'd you come here in the first place?
When was the first time you heard those words, return with honor? And what did you feel at the time? Or was it tapped through the wall? Was it?
I really don't know. It was so fitting. You know, when I heard it, it fit the circumstances at the time. You couldn't refute it. I mean, it's just as plain as the nose on your face. We are going to return. That's why we're staying alive. That's why we're fighting here, is to stay alive and return. Okay. Do you want to go back as a sniveling coward, or do you want to go back as a hero? If you're going to go back as a hero or anything close to it, you're going to have to go back with honor. And I think by the time that phrase was coined, or at least my first memories of it, we had, what was his name, running for president?
Ross Perot?
No, before that. He was going to crawl on his knees to North Vietnam if he had to get the POWs out.
Mondale.
No, before that. Some help here, folks.
This would be before Johnson and Nixon, correct?
No, it was right after Johnson.
Was it the governor from?
Yes.
Yeah. We know who you mean.
I keep coming up with Goldwater. It wasn't Goldwater. Yeah, that's annoying. But at any rate, he was trying to be elected president, and they knew the POW issue was a big deal. This was after Johnson. I don't know if he's running. He wasn't running against Johnson because he was a Democrat. But he said he would crawl on his hands and knees.
Not Hubert Humphrey.
Huh?
Not Hubert Humphrey.
No, no.
Okay, sorry.
But he would crawl on his hands and knees to North Vietnam to bring the POWs home, if that's what it took. To which we said, I think almost to a man, well, you can crawl on your hands and knees over here. You're going to have to crawl on your hands and knees back by yourself because we're not going. That's return with honor. He would have done it with no honor. And we weren't going to have any of that. We put up with too much to come back with our tails between our legs and our heads slumped over. And that was an issue. See, we maybe should have hit on this earlier, but that was a big deal with the Vietnamese being Asians and whatever. This personal pride and so forth is a big deal. And when I got a parade through Hai Phong the night that they brought me in there. I don't know how many million people there were there, but it was a big deal, and it was all for me. And they paraded me around. It's a long story, but one of the aspects of it was they paraded me around with a film crew following. I mean, it must have been a dozen or 15 photographers and sound people and whatever following in a truck. And I was in the back of a flatbed truck with a couple of guards holding me. And I would hold my head up because I'm a proud American. And they would hit me over the head with their rifle butts and whatever. Put your head down, head down. I mean, they weren't speaking English, but the message was clear. And when I had my head up, we're going through streets with 10, 15, 20 people deep on both sides. Floodlights from the truck behind us. And I've got my head up, and the people screaming at the top of their lungs. I saw women actually tear their hair out. You know, I'd heard of that old time somewhere. I thought it was just a phrase. Somebody was tearing their hair out in grief. And I saw women tear their hair out. I thought, geez, wow. And these guys, and stuff was being thrown up there, so the guards wanted my head down. They hit me and get me to put my head down, and the sound from the crowd would just... And we're talking about the communist regime. This is it. I lift my head up again. And for a bit there, I thought, this is interesting. If I'd been a psychology student, I might have done more with it. But as it was, I thought, well, let's see if this is really what's going on. I lift my head up. Screaming, yelling, carrying on. They hit me, head down. Noise dropped right down. Very interesting. I struck with that, the truth of that. I was controlling what they were doing. I didn't have much, but I had that.
Wow. What an amazing story. A couple things. One, while we're here, you tell a story of Paul Galante, when you first met Paul Galante. Could you tell us that story, sir?
Okay, well, when I was shot down the 1st of November, and I arrived at the Hanoi Hilton probably the 3rd or 4th. Now, Paul had already been there since July, and for whatever reason, he was being kept in where the new guys were brought in. We call it Heartbreak Hotel. There were 7 cells. There were 2 concrete slab racks in each one that's where we slept. And there was an 8th cell which had been made into a shower water area. It had water in there, and that's where the dishes were washed after we got done eating. All the fine silverware and so forth was taken care of there. And Paul got to do other things for the Vietnamese. And what happened when I was brought in there, they took my flight clothing and my boots, my helmet and everything. They threw it in that room, and they tossed him in there and told him to clean it up because he wasn't hurt. So he relates the story that he was cleaning this stuff up, and he saw initials on the shirt, this Marine fatigue shirt, that ARC. Nah, can't be Al. We were very good friends. We went through pre-flight together and been friends ever since. And then he got down to the boots, and he looked at the boots, and inside the tongue of the boot I'd written in ballpoint pen, Al Carpenter. And he saw that, and he said, this has got to be my buddy Al. Now, a year before that, I had been over there in '65, did a whole cruise, and whenever we came back, and Carolyn and I met with Paul and his wife Phyllis at the Officers Club at Breezy Point in Norfolk, and he was all hyped up about, well, he's finally got out of, he was going through the A4 rag, and he was going to go to sea, and he wanted to get over there before the war was over. He said, what's it like, Al? And I survived '65, so that wasn't all that bad. So I was telling him all about it, and I don't know, maybe I hyped it up. I'm not sure, but he couldn't wait to get over and get in the war zone. So he got over and immediately was shot down in July of '66. And I came back on my second cruise and got shot down for the second time in November of '66. And it was just quite a shock for him to find my gear there and know that I had joined him. We never had any contact. In fact, I think the entire time I never saw him, never talked to him.
And you also talk a little bit about, one of the things is as you described with the needle and the sewing, are the ways that you use time. And you mentioned Charlie creating, I believe, a clock system or other things for you.
Charlie is a very ingenious guy, very, very smart, very personable, excellent speaker. He's an exceptional individual. And I don't remember the exact circumstances, but we had a couple of things. We all felt like we were in excellent condition. And most of it probably been carrying a little bit too much weight at the time we got shot down. I know I weighed 186 the day I got shot down. And I'd weighed 155 when I graduated from high school, and that's where I should have been. Charlie gave it some thought, and he knew that everybody would like to know how much they weighed, because we thought, well, those guys look skinny, but I'm okay. I'm just my fighting weight now, so I'd like to know how much he weighed. And so Charlie somehow devised a scale with which he could weigh those of us who were interested and had a chance to try it out. And I don't remember, it was a weight and balance sort of thing, and how he got measures to adjust it, I don't know. But he did, and I think it was fairly accurate, because I think I weighed in at that time at about 130. So Charlie did that, and he did that to satisfy this need that we had. And another thing was a clock. He just, for the heck of it, I think, and because we had a Toastmasters group there, it was started by a couple of guys who'd been in Toastmasters International, chief among them Bob Lilly, who bunked right next to me in the big room, needed a clock to time speeches for 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, I think, and 5 minutes. And Charlie devised a way to do that. Again, I couldn't tell you how he went about it, but he did it, and we came to believe it was pretty accurate. That's Charlie Plum.
Wonderful. Let's see, you speak about the power of the brotherhood that you all felt, and the pride, and the meaning of pride in motivating you to resist and everything else. You tell a story of one night, sort of, it kind of happened without plan, but you started all singing song. Can you tell me about that?
I don't have it in the detail that others would. At the moment, I can't remember how it got started, but that immediately preceded the Alcatraz 11 being hiked out to Alcatraz. Well, I wish I could remember the trigger to it, and I just can't, but I think somebody had had enough. Again, I sure wish I could remember it, but he and a couple others around him started singing. And I don't remember if it was God Bless America or the national anthem, but it spread like wildfire. And this was in the big prison at Wallow, the Hanoi Hilton. And it spread from cell to cell, room to room, these big rooms, 60 people or so in a cell, all around the camp. And the more we could hear other people join in than we could, even though it was a ways away, we'd hear everybody join in, and we just got carried away with it. And so we started singing.
Could you sing a little bit of what you
Can
sang?
I sing?
Yes,
I don't think so, no.
Here you've endured torture. You could come out of a plane at 600 miles an hour, but I asked you to sing a little bit, and you
Yeah, no, not here, not now. But these guys, we just all got into it, and we started singing, and we'd sing louder and louder and singing at the top of our lungs. And the guards went crazy. Of course, they're just young enlisted guys, not responsible for anything except their post, and here all of their people are going crazy. So they got the camp officers, and they got more guards and whatever, and pretty soon we had guards at every window with their AK-47s and pointing them at us, and we really thought there was a good possibility that somebody with a loose trigger finger would start shooting. As soon as they did, the whole mess would erupt, and there'd be slaughter of POWs. And what the hell? Sing it louder. And we did.